You may begin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this special Black History Month Power Talk. As we commemorate Black History Month, we do more than reflect. We remember, we reclaim, and we reimagine. We honor the courage of those who came before us, and we examine how their faith, their scholarship, and their activism continues to shape the urgent conversations of today. This afternoon's conversation invites us into that interaction where belief meets boldness, where conviction fuels change, and where history informs how we forward. It is my honor to introduce our speaker, Dr. Chanta Haywood, a scholar, a leader, an author, and provost of Coppin State University. Dr. Haywood, provost and vice president for academic affairs in Baltimore at Coppin State University. Her role began officially on June 1st, 2025, and she is experienced higher education leader, a scholar, a writer, and administrator with nearly 25 years of experience in academic leadership. Over the course of her career, she has served in executive roles, including graduate dean, associate provost for academic affairs, associate vice president for research, and president for advancement across multiple university systems in Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, and Maryland. Dr. Haywood holds a PhD in American Literature from University of California, San Diego, and earned her bachelor's degree in English from Florida A&M University. She also completed a certificate in fostering diversity and inclusion from Yale University in 2023. As a scholar and author, she has published widely, in her book, Prophesying Daughters, Black Women Preachers and the Word 1823-1913 has been influential in exploring the power and legacy of Black women preachers in American history. Her leadership extends beyond academia. Dr. Haywood was appointed during the Obama administration to the U.S. Department of Education's Jake K. Davis Fellowship Board, where she served as chair for 4 years. Dr. Haywood will guide us through this powerful work and concept of divine defiance, merging faith and activism to address today's pressing social issues. And I ask for you to please join me in welcoming our beloved Provost, Dr. Chanta Haywood.
Thank you so much, Dr. Savoy, and thank you so much for your leadership and for those of you who are putting on this um, outstanding series in honor of Black History Month. Before I begin, I want to establish a clear boundary for us for our time together today. I'm not here to preach, even though you all hear me say over and over again that my dad's a preacher. But I am here today as a scholar of American literature and as the provost at Coppin and as a professor to offer you a strategic framework that is born from my primary research. And I'm going to read what I wrote today because I have so many points that I want to make, and I don't want to run the risk of skipping out or forgetting some of what it is that I have to say. So if you see me reading here and there, that's what's happening. I want to make sure that I get everything out. While we will discuss women of profound faith, this is not a religious sermon. We are here today to analyze, to perform what I call an intellectual excavation of the women that I analyze in my book, Prophesying Daughters, Black Women, Black Religious Women and the Word, 1823 to 1913. We're not just looking at how they prayed, we're looking at how they theorized and how they navigated a world that was designed to silence them. We're studying their narratives not merely as testimonials of faith, but as blueprints for survival, disruption, and leadership. So, to frame my discussion today, I look to the French philosopher Frantz Fanon, who famously wrote, "Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, define its mission, and either fulfill that mission or betray it. Historically, for the Black diaspora, the primary tool for discovering and fulfilling that mission has been what? Spirituality. Not as a private comfort, but as a public force. And my goal today is to provide this generation of thought leaders at Coppin State and beyond with a pathway to discover their mission by merging that conviction with activism through a concept that I have developed in my research called divine defiance. In my research for Prophesying Daughters, I discovered that for these women, spirituality was never passive. It was a strategic engine. This history leads me to a dialogue with you all. When the announcement for this lecture, Dr. Savoy, went out, I received a message from a member of our Coppin family, whom I will call Janelle. She reached out and shared that she has often wrestled with how to insert her faith into the how and the why of her daily work. Her struggle is not unique. It is the central tension of the modern leader. How do we bring our deepest convictions into secular spaces without apology? And I suspect that many of you are like Janelle, redefining what it means to be a person of conviction in 2026. And I want to pause and ask you these questions. How do you define or redefine spirituality in 2026? Is it tied to a building? Or is it an internal compass guiding your ethics in this digital age? And how does your worldview shape your response to the challenges of today? When you look at gun violence, immigration reform, climate change, or economic insecurity, do you see these as purely political issues or a mission requiring a deeper conviction to solve? And does your purpose to play a role in the movements? Does it play a role in the movements that you support, whether it's Me Too or Black Lives Matter or a local activism right here in Baltimore? Are you fueled by a temporary emotion or a permanent call? Ultimately, will your current framework help you fulfill or betray your mission? In the book, I examine the autobiographies of women who operated in a 19th century America that was a legal and social wilderness for them. They were the original architects of this path that I'm talking about. Jarena Lee, I'll start with her. In her narrative, she challenged the founder of the AME Church when he told her that their discipline did not permit women to preach. She challenged the logic of the institution itself, traveling over 2,000 miles in a single year to deliver her message. And then there was Julia Foote. Her autobiography details her excommunication for unauthorized preaching. She refused to let an institutional no be louder than her internal yes, eventually becoming a missionary who crossed the Atlantic to carry out her call. And then we have Mariah Stewart, the first American woman to speak before a promiscuous or a multifaceted audience. She stood in Boston and linked spiritual salvation directly to political activism. And finally, there was Frances Joseph Godet. Her life story takes us into the prisons where the state saw criminals, she saw potential, and eventually founding a home for Black youth that transformed the criminal justice landscape in New Orleans. So, how do we get from these autobiographies to this theory of divine defiance that I'm talking about? Thank you, Ms. Curtis, for asking. Okay. As I examined their narratives, I realized that they were performing a radical intellectual heist. Dr. Williams, a radical intellectual heist. They reached into the very scripture used against them, the tools of the oppressor, and pulled out a liberating truth. I call this prophesying because they were speaking a new reality into existence. And then I define divine defiance as the mobilization of faith and spiritual conviction to fuel the pursuit of social justice. This is the use of a higher law to defy an unjust human law. And as I sat with these texts, I had to ask myself, how did these women survive the crushing weight of their reality? How did they stand in front of a world that legally defined them as property and speak with the authority of the divine? And as they sat down to write about their lives from this conviction, what theoretical framework or paradigm did they leave behind? What script or what blueprint did they offer us? I realized that they were not just writing their history, they were writing their destiny. And they were practicing what I call an Oprah-esque aha moment of the soul. These women didn't just write autobiographies, they wrote what I call autometographies. And I'll repeat that. These women did not write autobiographies, they wrote what I call autometographies. And the emphasis there is on meta, the metaphysical, the divine. And here's the difference. An autobiography is a record of what happened to you. An autometography is a record of who you are becoming from a divine vantage point. It is the power to look at a world that calls you a servant, yet you write a text that says that you are a leader. It is, in my opinion, the ultimate act of narrative agency. Before you can change the world, you must refuse to let the world's draft of your life write your own draft. But let us be clear, an aha moment is only a revelation. It is not a revolution. Recognizing that you have the power to write your own text is the first step. But how do you actually hold the pen? How do you move from a moment of soul clarity into a lifetime of world-changing leadership? The prophesying daughters did not just leave us with their stories, they left us with a blueprint. They left us with a set of tactical maneuvers that allowed them to navigate, disrupt, and eventually dominate the spaces that were never built for them. So, I want to offer you all this blueprint. And these are the tenets of divine defiance. They consist of connecting yourself to a larger purpose, reclaiming rigid doctrines, creating counter interpretations, reconciling religion and spirituality, blurring the secular and the spiritual, and maintaining acute awareness. For those of you who may be taking notes, I'm going to repeat what those tenets of divine defiance are. They are connecting yourself to a larger purpose. They are reclaiming rigid doctrines, creating counter interpretations, reconciling religion and spirituality, blurring the secular and the spiritual, and maintaining acute awareness. And all of these tenets I gleaned from those autobiographical texts of Black women preachers. Now that you have the structure overview of the blueprint, I want us to now look at specific materials required to build it. A blueprint is a vision, but leadership is an execution. To move from the what to the how, we must define these tenets and, more importantly, see how they function in the real world. So I want you to think of the definitions that I'm going to give you as your building codes and the applications as your craftsmanship. So we're going to look at how the prophesying daughters utilized these tools in the 19th century and how you, as the scholars and leaders of 2026, must apply them today to fulfill your mission. So let's start with connecting to a larger purpose. That is the recognition that one's individual's actions, voice, and work are tied to a collective cause that transcends personal gain. That's the recognition that an individual's actions, voice, and work are tied to a collective cause that transcends personal gain. Jarena Lee did not walk thousands of miles for a career. Her purpose was spiritual and physical freedom of her people. That purpose was the fuel that kept her moving when she was penniless. So, to our students, your degree is a tool for community liberation. If you are a nursing major, your purpose is addressing health disparities in West Baltimore. When you connect your career to a cause, you become unburnoutable. Number two, reclaiming rigid doctrines. I define that as the strategic use of an institution's own language, laws, or logic to challenge its exclusive practices and demand inclusion. Historically, when the church discipline was used to silence women, Jarena Lee and Julia Foote used the Bible, the very doctrine used to keep them out, to prove that if God called a soul to speak, no man made rule could stop it. They reclaimed the text for their own liberation. Modern application is this: don't follow, don't just follow the rules. Learn them so well that you can change them. Use corporate, legal, and medical doctrines of the spaces you enter to prove why they must be more inclusive. Then there's count to the tenet of creating counter interpretations. I define that as narrative agency. That's rejecting oppressive labels to provide a self-defined truth based on internal conviction. Rejecting oppressive labels to provide a self-defined truth based on internal conviction. This is how Mariah Stewart used it. She offered a counter interpretation. She was the daughter of the divine, endowed with intellect. She wrote the text of the Black woman from servitude to prophetic leadership. Today, the world will offer you a text about yourself, narratives of not enough, but you must be your own editor. When the system says you can't, your inner call must provide the countertext that I am destined to. Then there is reconcile religion and spirituality. Now, this is the ability to find and maintain core spiritual truths and personal integrity, even when formal institutions fail. Julia Foote was excommunicated by her church. She reconciled her spirituality by realizing her conviction to the divine was not dependent on her approval of the bishop. Build an internal sanctuary. Find the values that sustain you when external structures are messy. Your integrity is not dependent on the perfection of the building that you stand in. Number 5, blur the secular and the spiritual. That is the refusal to separate professional excellence from social activism. Frances Joseph Godet, for example, for her, preaching, her work was in prison reform. She saw no wall between her spiritual conviction and her work in the legal system in Louisiana. So I like to say to our students that there is no wall between your GPA and your activism. Maintaining academic excellence in a system that once made it illegal for your ancestors to read is an act of defiance. Maintaining academic excellence in a system that once made it illegal for your ancestors to read is an act of defiance. And then finally, maintain acute awareness. That is a conscious commitment to stay informed about political and social issues, to turn conviction into effective action. These women were acutely aware of the Fugitive Slave Act and legal shifts across the country. They turned news into fuel for their prophesying. So you cannot lead what you do not see. Stay awake to the nuances of gun violence, climate change, and immigration reform. Divine defiance requires a book in one hand and the news in the other. So now you might ask, Provost Haywood, does this work in the real world? Thank you again for asking that question. And I am here before you as a witness that divine defiance is the engine driving Coppin State University. We began with our own namesake, Fannie Jackson Coppin. She was a prophesying daughter in her own right, a woman born into slavery who reclaimed the doctrine of education to become the first African American woman to head a school of higher learning. She didn't just teach, she spoke a new reality into existence for Black people in the 19th century. And now, today, under the leadership of President Anthony Jenkins, we are carrying her torch, moving from surviving to institutionalizing our own defiance. The national text says that Black men are disappearing from higher education. But at Coppin, we authored a counter text. We did not accept the narrative of decline. We practiced a 52% increase in male enrollment. For years, the rigid doctrine told us that HBCUs must do more with less. We challenged that logic, and through our Be More campaign, we surpassed a $25 million goal. We reclaimed the language of high-level philanthropy to prove our worth. You cannot achieve a 4.0 if you're hungry. So by launching the Eagle Achievement Center, the Coppin Food Pantry, the President and First Lady's Closet, we have blurred the line between administration and community care. And we're moving the earthly barriers to our metaphysical potential. And then the faculty here at Coppin hear me talk all the time about interdisciplinarity. And they know that that's one of my strategic goals as the provost here in academic affairs. These 19th century women were the original interdisciplinary thinkers. They were theologians, political scientists, social workers all at once. That is why I launched the Cross-Disciplinary Solutions Lab here on campus, where we are teaching our honor students that they cannot solve Baltimore's challenges with one lens. They must take a multifaceted, multidisciplinary approach to solving not just Baltimore's, but the world's problems. And our faculty, in my opinion, are practicing divine defiance every day. They're not just teaching context, they're prophesying over their students' potential. Through our push for interdisciplinary faculty development, we are ensuring that a biologist and a historian can together tackle environmental racism. So, as I conclude, 100 years from now, what would they say about this generation in 2026? The 19th century called for a radical faith to survive. 2026 calls for a radical framework to lead. And for us, Coppin is our pulpit. So, will you fulfill or betray your mission? I invite you to join me in a state of divine defiance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haywood. If there are questions, please definitely take the opportunity to type them in the chat. Um, I have a question. You distinguish between autobiography and what you call automatography.
I'll
Writing
type.
not,
Okay, go ahead.
sorry, automatography.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Hmm.
Writing not just about what happened, but who you are becoming from a divine vantage point. So, how can we as individuals today practice this kind of narrative agency in a society that constantly attempts to define us?
Mm. An amazing question. The first thing that we have to do, Dr. Savoy, is something very similar to what these women did. And it goes back to what you all hear me say a lot when I talk about Fanon. It's so foundational. It is, first of all, identifying your personal mission, right? Coming to terms with what you were called to do. That's what these women preachers did during
Yeah.
that time period, you know. And imagine coming to terms with the fact that you're called to preach in a societal context which says that blacks don't have souls,
Mm.
and which also says that a woman's place is in the house, is in the home. And so here you are having to navigate what is appearing to be this contradiction. And so the way in which I encourage people now is to really um, be deliberate and intentional about identifying what it is that you are set out to do.
Thank you so much for that.
Mhm.
We have a question in the chat, and that is a couple of questions. How do you disrupt oppressive systems, persuasive labels that are often placed upon educated women and make positive change for the good of everyone?
Mhm. Repeat that for me because I'm having a hard time
No problem. How
seeing.
do
I
you
don't see the
disrupt
question.
oppressive systems, defy pervasive labels that are often placed upon educated women, and make positive change for the good
Mhm.
of everyone?
Mhm. Once again, um, that's going to go back to that personal conviction. And I'm going to answer that question by speaking from my own personal experience.
Okay.
Particularly as a Black woman who is an educator and who is now an administrator, and who's navigated higher education at PWIs as well as HBCUs. There are these preconceived notions about our capabilities and about our abilities. And so you enter, and it's not just coming from um, those who are leaders, it is also coming from students. So, for example, as a Black woman who is a professor at a PWI, the moment I walk into a classroom, I have to deconstruct preconceived notions by students who's never seen the Black person, many of them um, who may not have had a Black teacher or a professor who have these preconceived notions about my credentials, about my capability, and my abilities to be able to teach them. And the irony is that I've often confronted that, and I've dealt with young people, and I used to jokingly say to myself, and now I say it out loud, that I will have forgotten more than many of them know at the stage that they are questioning me. But you have to contend with these social constructs about our abilities and our inabilities. And so the way in which we contend with that is to have your own sense of personal conviction. And mine is informed by my spiritual conviction and my understanding of who I am and whose I am. And again, I'm not preaching, but it is grounded seriously in my personal faith and in my personal conviction in who I am, and my having already accepted early on that I am called to be a leader in higher education?
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
I was just saying those same words to myself. I know who I am and whose I am.
Mhm.
Dr. Haywood, thank you. Thank you for reminding us that faith is not passive, it is actually active. Conviction is not act, it is embodied, and that before we attempt to change the world, we must first decide who we are becoming within the world. And so, as we close, I hope that each of us leave asking ourselves, what draft of life am I allowing the world to write?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
what look like to author it differently? Like, do you author it with courage, author it with conviction, and with clarity and purpose? Black History Month actually calls us not to remember the past, but to examine how we show up in the present. And the women that you've highlighted in your book, which is actually in the chat, it was put in there, um, they didn't wait for permission.
Mm-mm.
They moved with purpose, even when the law and the culture institutions said no. And we're watching women today do that, from Jasmine Crockett to Stacey Adams and more. May we leave here today not fueled by temporary emotions, but anchored in something deeper. Thank
Mhm.
you all for being here. And again, join me once again in thanking Dr. Haywood. We have also in believe that we have a centennial bookshelf, and so that's in the chat as well. So you can find her book information and in the chat. Thank you so much. And we also have some more events that's happening for Black History Month. You get an opportunity to join us.
Well, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you both. This concludes the program.
Can I see the questions?
Yeah.
Let me stop the recording one moment. But yes, you can see the questions in the chat.
Okay.